Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We're here for another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. The video you're tuning in for today is Standard Best of 3, Traditional Standard, Standard with sideboards. If you're looking for Standard Best of 1, we covered it in another video. We will cover the other formats on Arena as well, both Best of 1 and Best of 3, Explore, Historic, and Alchemy. However, that data usually takes about a week and a half to 2 weeks after the release. Especially with this being kind of the fall rotation, Standard becomes the most popular, so we get the data the soonest for that. And speaking of data, we're getting it from UntappedGG, what you see on the screen. It's a companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, aggregates win rate data, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. Link is in the video description if you want to get started with Untapped. I'll paste all these deck lists for your own consumption as well, so you can easily import them. We're also going to be taking a look. There was a bunch of MTGO Magic the Gathering online challenges and leagues over the weekend, so a lot of good stats coming in for the best of 3 format. So we will dive in here and we're going to start looking at the popularity of the day. So ignore the May 30th here. We're just looking at the day itself. So the most popular deck by a large margin, 1 in 5 games on average, will be against Golgari Midrange. So there's quite a few different slight variations with this, which is interesting to see. People are still trying to configure what is the optimal kind of mid-range list. But, 20% is a very high representation. It turns out black cards are still good when you don't ban Sheoldred. And then we have mono red aggro, surprisingly putting up some decent results. Fairies, 7% as well. Then we have the old Dimir Midrange list, which was kind of top of the notch. We have the 4-color control. That's probably some sort of domain list, if I'm honest. It's probably just splashing red. Orzhov Midrange, which is mono white, splash black for like Reach the Multiverse, and the new Virtue of Persistence. 5-color domain, and there's kind of 2 builds of domain we'll cover, as well as Esper Control. Looking at kind of win rates for the day, domain's doing the best, followed by mono red, the 5-color so I think I'll kind of explain. So there's a 5-color domain combo with Invasion of Alara, and then there's the more traditional ramp deck with like Topiary Stomper, as well as like Atraxa on the top end. You're kind of ramping more in that sense, kind of playing it out. But we're looking at kind of the trend. It's only been a couple days. This is from the 12th that we're recording. The set came out on the 7th, or the 5th, so it's only been 7 days, but big increase in terms of the Golgari decks. So kind of interesting there. We got a sub, so if you see in the top right hand corner as we're kind of proceeding through, we are now 7 subs from 10,000. So if you haven't subscribed already, free, easy, helps with the channel a lot. But live updates. So we're looking September 5th through today. So 7 days of data, platinum to mythic rank. There was 22,000 best of 3 matches played from Untapped, and the highest win rate deck is mono red aggro. So kind of bouncing between it. So mono red actually just won the standard challenge, I believe. So this is the list here that we see. So that's likely why it's more popular right now. So we'll kind of be bouncing back. Right at the early point, the standard challenge does have a big influence on what we see on the ladder. So kind of your port of your best of 1 deck. The new cards that we're getting into it are Godric Cloaked Reveler, 3 mana, 3/3 haste. If it has the celebration ability. So if 2 or more permanents that are non-land enter the battlefield, becomes a 4/4 flyer with fire breathing. This card's been very powerful. A lot of ways to kind of incidentally turn it on. You have like the squeeze that make the tokens. You have the Charming Scoundrel, another new card that makes it. Kumano flipping. So even if you just curve out Kumano 1, 2 drop, Godric on 3, Godric counts itself. So very easy to kind of enable this. And the evasion is something that's quite like a benefit in this deck to kind of go over your Sheoldred, stuff of that nature. The other new card in the list is Charming Scoundrel. So a flexible card, 2 mana, 1/1 haste, but it can either discard a card and draw a card, create a treasure to help you ramp, or create a Wicked Roll, which is a 1/1 aura that goes on any creature you control. It gives them, gives +1/1 to any creature you control, and it says when this aura is put into the graveyard, your opponent loses a life. So kind of makes your creatures bigger. You can put it on like differentiating threats and kind of get through that value there. The rest of the deck's pretty stock to what we've seen in the past. Kumano, Swiss Spears, Phoenix Chicks. Us is on a single Shivan Devastator. Your Bloodthirsty Adversary package, 2 Nahiri's Warcrafting in the main, as well as a Stoke the Flames, a card that hasn't seen too much play. Was a big player when it was originally printed, but hasn't been doing as well in recent sets. The mana base is a little interesting. 23 lands seems appropriate, but 3 Mishra's Foundry, 2 Sokuzans. I don't love 3 Mishras because it really limits your ability to double spell in a turn, especially if you draw them early. But outside of that, at least they're playing a reasonable amount of lands. Your sideboard, any sort of go wide token decks. You have the Lithomantic Barrage for white and blue decks. Another Devastator for like longer, grindier games, and just when you need the evasion. Some removal, like Obliterating Bolt. Brotherhood's End is good if like your opponent's on like soldiers or like humans. The mono white matchup can be a little difficult if they go wide enough, similarly with humans, because they tend to outscale you slightly in terms of power, so this can help you break that disparity. You have Nahiri's Warcrafting, just another copy for 5 damage. Twisted Fealty is the new threat in effect, so you can gain control. You also create a Wicked roll. For the grindier matchups, things with a lot of sweepers, you have Jaya as well as Koth. And the Thundering Raiju in the sideboard is an interesting one. I've been kind of thinking, like, where would I want this? So I think, like, in matchups that generally don't have large amounts of removal, it does allow you to snowball. It also helps you in, like, creature mirrors to kind of outscale. I wouldn't bring it into matchups that are counterspell based. Just generally, you don't want your 4-drop. Also, just this is really bad attacking into, like, Sheoldred or just decks that kind of outscale you in terms of size. From there, we go to Golgari Midrange, the most played deck, 58%. This is probably one of the closest to net new decks that we have in the format. So it's leveraging some of the same powerful black cards, but the big kind of payoff cards. The Mosswood Dread Knight, this card's been really, really good. It's very sticky, so 2 mana, draws a card, loses a life for its adventure, and then for 2 mana, you get a 3/2 Trampler. If it dies, you can cast it from the graveyard until your next turn for its adventure cost. So this thing just keeps coming back. A lot of utility there. Black gives you the best removal, go for the throats, cut downs. Terra Sunder is a flexible removal spell. Teachings kind of fills your yard. And then this version's on 2 Lord Skitter Sewer Kings. Incidental Graveyard Hate in the main by making tokens, lets you go wide. And then this also helps you insulate against like Liliana from your opponent. Graveyard Trespassers, Glissa's in here, Liliana's, Blossoming Tortoise. Card has been pretty good too. So 4 mana 3/3 mills or attacks. When it enters battlefield or attacks, mill 3 gets put a land from your graveyard into play. It reduces the activated ability of lands, and then also gives you a boost in terms of power. They have Mishra's Foundry in here. I would probably honestly just play the Myrex. You still get the discount, but I think just being able in grindier matchups to repeatedly just make tokens is beneficial. The Relentless Cottage is another powerful creature line that we have in here. The other black card that we have in here is Virtue of Persistence, a 2 mana removal spell, and then late game provides you kind of a mass reanimation effect. One thing, so some lists have been playing upwards of 4 Lilianas, some have not been on the Lord Skitter, some have played Ashiok. I played a version, so there's a demo on my YouTube if you want to take a look. More Duress in the main, which was pretty good. I was playing like 4 Sheoldred. I was playing a Sorin in there. Sorin was actually pretty good in the grindier matchups too. You could play Sheoldred's Edict in the main. You could play a copy of the End. There's a lot of kind of flexible options in there. Sideboard, more early game removal. Against control, you have Hand Hate. Again, just more Hand Hate that's available. Terra Sunder's Catch-All removal. Liliana, against control decks, mid-range decks kind of grinding out. MTG Arena for the grindier matchups. The End is your own ban in restricted list for any permanent. This is actually like really good. I did it against blue-white control where I hit their Wandering Emperor and they basically had to try to win through the Myrex, so it just wasn't fast enough. Reach the Multiverse is really good into the ramp decks, anything big mana, kind of go over the top. And then Nissa is really good against the heavy sweeper, grindy matchups. One card that you may want to consider if you're running into this deck a lot. So with Liliana, it's a forced discard. Obstinate Baloth is both good against the mono red matchup because it gains you life for the aggressive decks, but against these discard decks, it's basically a free discard fodder into Liliana that gets you a 4/4 after. So something to consider if you're kind of running into this deck and mono red a lot. I'm not going to go too much into depth here. This is Dimir Midrange. It's basically the stock list from last season. Mono black, splash blue for some counter spells, Fairy Vandal, and Kaido Suzuki. Really no changes in this deck whatsoever. So it's here. If you don't have many wild cards yet, you're still kind of figuring out what you want to build, and you want something to still compete. Has a reasonable win rate, all things considered. We'll then go to Dimir Faeries. So this is a list 55, 56. It's doing better than I thought it would, in all honesty. It's not like all in on fairies. Well, there's some numbers. So you have Fairy Mastermind, Fairy Vandal, the Okiba. You're not playing like, Forest, the Talion, 3-drop isn't being played, some Halo Forgers. The spells are very good in this deck. The creatures, the fairies that they printed aren't the strongest outside of Fairy Mastermind, I'd say. You're lacking some of the flash ones, but with Ego Drain, it's kind of the Thoughtseize effect, provided you have a fairy. Otherwise, they get to take a card, or you have to exile a card from your hand. Fairy Fencing is a scalable removal spell. You have Spell Stutter, which is basically mana leak if you have a fairy. So a lot of kind of cheap counter spells. This could play pretty good into these bigger mana decks. You have Kaido for card advantage. I don't really like Sleep Cursed Fairy, but it's seeing play. I think it's too slow, but some people swear by it. The Invasion of Amonkhet, just a kind of way to reanimate stuff out of both graveyards. You have Talion that can attack your opponent and draw you cards. Shieldred. In all honesty, you're probably better off just playing another Shieldred. It's a much better card than this Talion. The one thing with this mana base too, you have 22 lands. I would probably find space for a Myrex somewhere in there. Like, there's just no excuse to not be playing utility lands, especially in like draw-go situations. A lot of the decks in best of 3 are going to be grinding out longer, so something to keep in mind. So just more early removal for the aggressive decks, hand tape for the control decks. Big mana decks, you have the Disdainful Stroke, then you have the Siphon Insight for the kind of grindier matchups, just steal their best cards. Glistening Deluge for the white-based creature decks. Shieldred, because Shieldred's busted, and then the End, as we mentioned. So another deck, this one's been a weird one. So on the ladder, it's got a terrible win rate. It won a large, this is Naya Pia. This won a 140-person tournament in Asia over the weekend, and it's put up some 5-0s on MTGO. I played a version of this, the video's up on my YouTube right now. I tweaked it slightly because there's certain cards I just don't necessarily agree with in the deck. So the big kind of core of the deck is Pia letting you play cards from exile to create Thopters, you get haste. So you have now 12 Reckless Impulse style effects. So with the Questing Druid, you have Seek the Beast, Reckless Impulse, and Ren's Resolve. So the thing is, there's a lot of card advantage in this deck. The one thing to note, though, with Questing Druid, the Seek the Beast ability, this is till the end of your next end step, not to the end of your next turn. So there is a more time constraint in terms of when you can play this out. The Druid itself gets fairly large. This is actually the only green card in the deck, so just be mindful of that. This land kind of sucks, and it kind of screws up your curve. I would probably, like, when I played this, I cut the Jetmir's Garden, and I think I trimmed down on these, and I just played more basics. And I also trimmed some of the number of the green sources. You're splashing just for that. You don't need this many green sources. There's too many tap lands, I found. That kind of screwed up the curve, especially late game when you're trying to chain together multiple spells. I like to Torch the Tower. I don't like Light Up the Night, as well as Chandra in this list. Too big of mana commitments in terms of curving out. This is kind of your big mana top end spell, but the thing is, you're playing a bunch of these cards that have a limited window, so you want to cast multiple spells, not big spells. So cheaper things like that. Doubling the Chandra isn't always great with these because you still have to be able to play the cards. So just chaining like multiple impulses into multiple impulses when you don't have the mana to cast it just kind of loses you that card advantage. So I went up another copy of Invasion. I trimmed the Destroy Evil. So the theory here is like Voldaren Thrillseeker, you can fling a big Questing Druid. The card's really weak on its own. You either have to be like all in, and like Gruul Boats, you have a lot of threats. This you kind of go wide as opposed to go tall for the most part. Again, like Nahiri's Warcrafting, just a very expensive card in this deck relative to things. So like I went up more Wandering Emperors. I was playing it more of a token deck. And then just with like some card draw. Like this card was pretty good in there, just kind of scaling. The Curse of Silence, I went up 2 copies in the sideboard. This was good against like Farewell decks, kind of taxing and that effect. You have like Graveyard Hate with, I guess, a Soul Cauldron. As we're seeing more kind of Graveyard synergies, it may be worth bringing it back. But in the video, I cut the Soul Cauldrons, just played a full thing of a Gobakan. The deck has a hard time against like Sunfall and Farewell, so I was kind of offsetting it with that. I was playing it like extra copies of Jaya over like the Chandra's Hope Beacon. I liked having I like post board a lot of times it became like a Planeswalker control deck, and I kind of liked the way that configuration was. So the video's up today if you want to take a look. It does some cool things, but it wouldn't be the deck I would take to a tournament. It's just a little too inconsistent, I find, relative to the power level of other things in the format. So we had two, so we had the MTGO Challenge as well as the Standard League. So we'll kind of just highlight these decks themselves. So the mono red list that we saw, and this is the deck that I want to highlight now. So it is a combo deck. If you want to see how the combo plays out, it's on my YouTube. Did a full run with it, so you can see the deck in action. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, the combination of Invasion of Alara. So Invasion of Alara with wizards, you got to turn your head sideways. But basically, what happens is you cast Invasion of Alara. It mills cards from the top of your library until you find 2 cards that are 4 CMC or less. There's only 5 cards in your deck that are 4 CMC or less. It's the Bramble Familiar as well as 1 Go for the Throat. So you're always guaranteed to find a Bramble Familiar. How it's worded on the Invasion of Alara, you find Bramble Familiar, but you can cast Fetch Quest, which then mills 7 cards, and then you could put an enchantment, land, or creature into play from the milled cards for free. Ideally, if you hit Cemetery Desecrator, you can then remove counters from the Invasion of Alara to flip it. So you kind of get that value there as well. Or you can like hard cast like Virtue of Persistence, any of like the Atalis, Atraxas, Flesh Gorgers, anything of that nature. So it's kind of the combo. I did not like Luca in this deck. I have no clue why Luca's in this deck. I'm very upset I wasted Mythic Rare Wild cards on it. I never wanted to cast it. It just seems at like odds with playing it. This deck is very soft to counter spells. I ran into like an Esper midrange deck that was just like spell piercing me, make disappearing, and I just couldn't curve out. They had like enough pressure early, and then just kind of got me that way. Against traditional ramp, it can get outscaled in terms of like limiting what you can do, especially like if they're on Breach the Multiverse or anything like that. I got hit by a Breach and it really hurt. Kind of going from there. The one thing I would say is, so instead of here, like the Lucas, play the what's the 5-color saga, the 6 mana, the one that flips into a dragon. I forget the name. Try that one out. I also found it's a little slow to get started at times. Another card you may want to consider instead of Luca maybe is there is the Kami from Kamigawa that you can channel. It's a 6 mana enchantment creature that you could channel for 3 to find a basic land and put it into play. That's also a way to kind of ramp, because the big thing is with this deck, the curve is like ridiculous. If you see it in the deck builder, it's like all 7 mana drops. Well, you have ways to kind of circumvent that. The Leyline Bindings, cheap removal, Virtue of Persistence can help. You are kind of slower to get going. You're not playing Ossification. You're not playing Courier's Briefcase. You're not playing the Ramp Dinosaur or the Invasion of Zendikar. So that's just kind of ways you can offset that. Personally, having played this deck, and I've been more recently playing the traditional ramp with the Beanstalk card, the 2 mana enchantment that draws you cards. The Beanstalk's nuts in the deck. You draw a bunch of cards, and I think just having access to sweepers. One thing you may want to consider if you're running like up the Beanstalk as a card, this card's really good in these ramp decks. Something I'm playing 4 of in the main, and I really like that. Elish Norn, if you're running into a lot of these decks, you can just main it. Doubles up all your stuff and just absolutely like fizzles out all what your opponent wants to do. The only removal that they would have is in the traditional shell, is if they have access to Sunfall or Farewell. So we have just more versions of like the Golgari deck. This is similar to the one we saw with the Blossoming Tortoise. We are seeing some mono white decks with Spellbook Vendor in the main. So again, just like cheaper aggro decks that can get under your opponent's effects. Ossifications in the main, Wedding Announcements in the sides. We have Esper Legends, Lord Skitter making an appearance in the main. Otherwise, pretty stock, all things considered. Just copies of Lord Skitter being a legendary creature. We have some soldiers. The soldiers decks are now playing Wedding Announcement main, as well as Make Disappear, just have cheap interaction. Just more fairies decks. So varied versions of fairies if you want to see what's kind of going from there. Again, just like blue-white soldiers, mono-white. We have like the ramp version again of the deck. So this is the other version. So there's kind of different takes on it. I'm on 4 Ossifications main and 4 Beanstalks. I'm playing it in best of 1 right now, but I'm kind of porting it. So I'll probably play that in best of 3, but it might change. So a lot of them are playing Courier's Briefcase. This one's heavier on black mana sources, so it is playing Virtue of Persistence. The version I'm playing is not on the Persistence. Some are on the Bramble Familiar. I am still on the Archangel, so I don't know if there's like a defined list. There's a lot of different ways you can take these. This version's on like a single copy of Herd Migration and then drag to the bottom. Personally, I like having the Herd Migrations. It just really helps you do stuff in the early game. The 3 life isn't something to scoff at either. But I think having access to like Thrun and Tyrannics in the side, some numbers would be useful in that sense. See like the ramp version, Celestis. So this is just like Esper Control. And then we have like enchantments. Kind of going over to the Standard League, we see another version. So this is another like Tyvar version of the Golgari deck. So we see some cheaper cards in like Misery Shadow, Armored Scrap Gorger, Bramble Familiar. So just different type of take on it. A little bit more creature heavy, a little bit more aggressive with some recursion from Tyvar in there. Some Vraskas in the side. See a different take on Mono Red. This one's got the Raging Battle Mouse in it. I'm so like preconditioned to Historic that whenever I see 1 toughness, I just think Dies to Bowmaster, can't be played. Urbrass Forge, probably a solid card in the sideboard for like heavy removal options. Fortunately, it does get hit by Farewell, but against like Sunfall, it's a recurring threat. Another kind of version, this version's on Beseech the Mirror as well. In the ramp deck, so we see kind of variations. This one's got like the Talion's Messenger in the Fairies deck. Some Moon Circuit Hackets, so you got some ninjutsu action happening. This list is really cool. I gotta give this one a shot. So 5-0, it is an Abzan kind of control deck. So up the Beanstalk, Virtue of Persistence, Cruelty of Gix in here, all the Marches in here, Union of the Third Path, and then White Sun's Twilight, Sunfall, or the Creature Lands in Myrex are your win conditions. So really just turning off all your opponent's removal. You just have incidental like stupid creatures, or just happen to animate your opponents with hard casting Virtue. Trespassers in the side, Skrelv Hive. So just like a lot of ways to kind of combat it. This looks really sweet. And then like just more mono white decks. So you're kind of going with that avenue, but this gives you a feel. I'm playing similar to this, just kind of tweaking numbers here and there, but you'll see like the ramp decks. Personally, if I were to play in anything right now, I'd play some form of traditional 5-color ramp. I think it gives you the most flexible options, some of the best removal, kind of going through there. I'm going to take a look. I'll probably end up, like, once I move to best of 3 with this list, I'm going to just kind of slot in at least a copy of Virtue. I think it's a good hit there. And I'll also test out some copies of Bramble. Being best of 1, I like having the Ossifications for more immediate removal in there. Mono Black we have here. I'm just seeing if there's anything. Yeah, so this is the Naya Pia. So like it can win you games, this 1-5-0 with the stock list. I just think it's a little clunky in the way that it is right now. There is like a blue-white Mind Splice deck. So if you're looking for something like that, it's a lot of different options to kind of get started. But format's been pretty open, to be like honest, and best of 3. Trying out like different things like that. Let me know in the comments what you think, what you've been playing, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.